Okay, so all right, so you start to think about the editing whilst you're shooting, and you've talked about contrasting shots and so why is that so important when you finally deliver your film to the editor? What is it then that he then puts down? He lays it all down. Why do you need all these contrasts in the shot? What does it do?
Okay, well, the first part of the process, which I touched on before, is that Samba and I sat and looked at what we had shot, and together decided which bits we liked and which hadn't worked so much, and so once we've done that, it's like we've kind of already honed down the palette slightly that's going to go into the computer, because again, you know, it's all about choices. There's choices in the moment of shooting, well, there's choices before you start shooting, there's choices in the moment of shooting, and then, you know, in the edit there's choices, you know, this is interesting, that's not interesting, that works, that doesn't. So that process begins then, and then once the footage is in the computer, Simon then looked at it, and he then was drawn to particular kind of moments, and so we have in our head a sort of general concept that we're playing around with two different locations, some sort of relationship between these two different locations, and then Simon chose, and actually that what drew his attention first was the shots on the tabletop and the rhythm that was created in those. So there's an initial rhythm through my cameras moving kind of sideways, and Samba's moving kind of like this, and there's a kind of leaving of frame. So Simon was sort of drawn to that, and he basically starts to put shots together, and what he's looking at is building up rhythms and through lines through the material that create an energy, yeah, and he's looking. There's many different levels, but on one level he's looking at creating flow. He's also looking at creating pace, energy, changes of pace. It's like, I mean, we've always said it's like creating music. You know, you're looking for the different tones, the different textures. And then placing them together and seeing what happens. Okay, so you've got these three shots working together. Now, what happens when you add something else in? And you know, on a very basic level, you know, how do things cut together? How can you make two different shots juxtaposed? How can you make that work? You know, does it either cut across the movement? Does it go with the movement? Does the movement travel through it? Is the movement picked on from one shot into another shot through different parts of the body or the camera movement? So it's really about knitting all these things together. And so Samba by this point had left, and basically in our hands. The only other thing that we did before he went was we listened to a piece of music that Simon had been thinking about, a track by Philip Jeck that was actually created for a live performance that Simon made projections for, choreographed by Marisa Zanotti about 15 years ago. And he remembered this track, and it had been released then on a CD of Philip Jeck's, and Philip had given this CD to Simon years ago. And Simon remembered this particular track, and there was something about it, he just thought maybe this might work with this particular edit and this particular film. And it's not the usual way that we work with sound, because usually we actually create the soundtrack from scratch using the sounds of the dancer and the space. But in this case we kind of felt like we wanted to add another layer to it, and something that would help us to create a structure. So we all listened to this music, and we thought, well, we'll at least give it a go and see if it works, and if it doesn't, then we'll go back to the drawing board in terms of music. This was a development project, so that it had a minimal amount of money available, so it wasn't actually possible for us to say, okay, and then we'll go and spend 5 days in a dubbing mix and see if we can create it, or we'll go and commission so and so to write music. So there was also a slight element of necessity. And so Samba left at that point, and then, you know, just over the months, in little fits and starts, Simon
How many months did you edit for?
Well, I mean, I'm saying we edited it for a few days, but it was over periods, because that's just when Simon had time.
Yeah.
But he did an initial edit, probably of about 2 or 3 days, and got a structure, and then we looked at it and, you know, played back and forth a bit. Then we sent it off to China, and again, you know, the communication is very difficult particularly to China. But we had, again, communication through Raymond Wong in Hong Kong, who was able to give us Samba's feedback, which was very useful. It was really entirely about some pacing and some choice of shots in the end. There was no major kind of disagreement about what we were doing or anything. It was very much just kind of a bit of sort of nitpicking, which was absolutely fine.
I mean, you can really see that your process is leading to a good media company signature. I mean, you've got a signature to your films.
Yeah, we have an approach to making work, and a sort of belief in a process. Yeah, but there's an approach. You know, I have an approach to making work. It's not just a sort of like, oh, this is nice. You know, oh, maybe we could do this or that. You know, we have a sort of philosophy about making screen dance, and then we follow that through. And it's not like we don't do it by rote. It's not like, okay, now we do this shot, now we do that shot. But it's very much a process, you know. And if I didn't have that, I could never just meet somebody one day and work with them. You know, I could never make a film in this way. We'd have to spend months discussing what we were going to do. Whereas actually, you know, I can just walk into the room and do something, and Samba can do the same, you know. And the other people I work with at the moment, you know, Kirsty Simpson, Michael Schumacher, it's the same. We can just walk into space and create a piece of work because we have the tools to do it, you know, and an approach. It's not nothing is random. You know, it's not at all random. Even though when you say improvisation, which is a word I'm on the process of banning from my vocabulary, but I haven't quite got there yet. You know, people think you mean you don't know what you're doing. But actually what I mean is you really know what you're doing. You know so well what you're doing that you can do it in the moment. Absolutely, you know. But it's always been a tricky word, you know.
Well, I mean, that's what you get from your work. So we always feel that we're present and in the moment. And I thank you very much because it's really, really strong. Thank you. Thanks, Katrina.